손을 잡고 이 말에. 뭐야, 다 대단하나? 아니, 라면을 샤샤가 이나야. 다 이런데 장주 섬라. 즉샤야. 이해되거든. 손을 잡고 이 말에. 걔도 라면을 샤샤라야. 이런데 그렇지. 아니 답에 신심이 장주 섬세다. 하여튼 내려도 지금이 민기에 들어가지 대화서 이 말이야. 나야. 삼바 디지 아주 수교리지 게임을 결하시네. 아니 뭐네 기회 기부 소리 말이야. 알아서 올라 기분 되게 알고도 또 우리 제 누구도 와. 당원에 지 뭐다거나 뭐때고 셈베 밥에고 기부지 누구잖아? 장주에서 싸운다나? 다 대단하가지 뭐야 매번이야. 남주도 잔디기 샤샤디기 그래서 라마시베 나리야. 견의 라마, 견의 이름, 견의 카드 최종대 대내 송대 장주가도 견미 대신 메시베 대장 바로 심해다야 투시적 송저라 시신지주 우주근 땡겨 총수 바주 송세대리 장주 섬세대리 이 탁절이네. 삼바삼보스대하게 많아요. 그다음에 신들의 핑계도 와 대장 바로의 핑계도 와 시가 하면 될이야. 장주가 그 팬티스면 야구 되었잖아. 깨와치면 야구 이거 다 최저거래. 가려서는 깨와치면 도장이라 돼. 뒷배치기라 돼. 그리고 장주가 다 도도 와. 그다음 응원들 이제 무슨 상황이야? 선언부터 하는 두꺼가 돼. 장주가 하고 선언 중요하면 누가? 전 대장 바로 치매타야 도시적인 성절하세. 단디 시버 코알레 줘야 되시기도 와. 알아서는 시버 코알레야 과야 돼 당신이 시기야래. 당신세야 되게 라야 풍 샤야 풍이 여버디 장주에서 뭐 남주적 시투에 왜 있잖아요. 장주에서는 나봐 영의지 당신 당에 가지. 당신이 상황 가봤던 그래. 드리면 무슨 시버 코알레 줘야. 그래서 시발을 줘야 치도 저주서 거보다 말이 돼. 근데 자주서 건배 샤라 시발을 줘야 달아도 용서로 와. 봐요. 그래서 내년에 시신 직접 시월을 줘야 자주서 콘에 떡이 시월을 줘도 말다. 너무 큰데지게 시월 차저를 줘야 돼. 시신 직접 모두 근저 다세 대단 치마 내가 터두기 너는 탐절로 뒤쪽인 것도가 다른 거랑서 미지치기 때 너는 패봐 새로운 문제는 자주성 건다 생기버 연구래 생기버 되게 류대 연구래 니 기버 연구래 하나 좋아서 연구래 아니 미상으로 있냐도 연구래 자치울 수 있냐도 연구래 기부도가 미스를 뭐 연구래 죄송아 개마게 보내 개야도 심하게 보내 시야 패지가 더 말해 장주가 semsa samba sambuti 다 세상을 당도나 그다음에 로션신 이번이나야 미디 그는 잡아주고래 너 담아지면 이나야 그 녀다서가 이거 말해 그 그는 잡아주고래 그는 잡아주고래 거부 차서네 장주가 생기 냠내로 떠서야이나 그거는 거부 파 줘버주고래 거부 상관없어 수부서가 되듯이구나 여자도가 아니 여자들 부부서에 수이제 다 나저 빨라도 막 안 빨라다 아무나다 있는데 상관없어 수부서가 생겨서 참 쳤습니다. 에 도서도 찾아보이데 따지는 도시계 좀 삼자야 내가 알다 택다 삼바 야고 쇼나 와다 보고 있네 그냥 뭐 망하자 그래 보고 상관없어 짜래 상관없어 삼나싱해 주나 보고 정말이 그냥 말을 말해 미술 때문에 그 나오게고 말해. 서버서 보시잖아. 보고 주주인이 끼우는 거래. 발만 있는 끼우는 거래. 거부 있는 끼우는 거래. 새들 끼우는 거래. 새심을 끼우는 거래. 쌍게 깨야 저것이 되셔. 장중성 건다. 서버상 고치다. 저서도 좀 기글 봐. 봐야. 근데 인도자네 대장 봐도 심했다야. 도시적인 성적 시신지도 무릎 근절 땡겨 좋아쳐도 봐. 땡겨 좋은서 발전 뒤송도가 그것은 쉬워는 시래 자르지 그것이 나야 되게 내가 지금 이렇게 토이 토모질라 내가 지금 레벨 있는 양의 제주에서 상담도 되면 몇이다 다 봐줘버리지 내가 그거는 아주 다행이야 내가 써야 돼 내가 생각해 가야 임제도 보다 상황로 년에마다 디자인스 파샤스 디게이스 파샤스 디다
哦呀，是我们最近养鸡保障的第三层级，我让送去我是在我的妈妈了，是我。这点点儿是不希望他那点这个往去想法是生活当中都能让这经历具体往过想。무슨 등으로 전달 제진진 무슨 뭐를 길러서 무슨 동안 어떤 정치나 담바 남기 땅도 서 몰라서 정말 이 다시 되라시고요.
So Khenpo is saying Tashi delay and good day to everyone.
되니 다 때랑 양결 나초 록동 인인의 양다름이 존타바당 아니 냠的这个就是心当这个去千年生那的去过了罗中节的吧的还讲搞了上不的
So Khenpo ngeta sa yak thak chuba da ko.
Oh,
So Khenpo is just expressing that he's glad that we're able to continue our Dharma learning together, and even though it's online this time, still it's wonderful we have the ability to all gather together in the Dharma in this way.
되니 다 때랑 맞춰고 해야 돼. 장주그 생각을 장주그 생각을 배주 야침보 띵사보 된다레스.
So today's teaching is about Bodhichitta, which is a very vast and very profound subject.
택바 침보그 냠렌지기 예나 장주그 생각나 마디바 띵장매바 같은 젠니 송요레스.
So it's said that there is not a single practice of the Mahayana that is not infused with bodhicitta.
베나 ngari panchin yoang ngari panchin ki donsum nangi na 장적 그 셈데라 예와 뭐지 치 당부지 직 니 아니 성제나 이제나 나제나 죽제나 니게 자식제나 들이 고름지긴 이와치.
And one of the teachings of the great Ngari Panchen, Ngari Pandita, he taught of bodhicitta and explained it in many different ways. The bodhicitta of which there is one type, which there is two types, 3 types, 4 types, 5 types, 6 types. There's 21 types of bodhicitta.
He nani pena nga seondi lam nga takba chimbuga lam nga de o 장주그 심 그 이와리.
So when he talked of the 5 bodhicittas, he was talking about the 5 paths of the Mahayana path to enlightenment. The 5 paths. So each of those paths is a bodhicitta unto itself.
아니 쭉 이위 가서 8월도 침바 쭉데 장주그 심 그 이와리 송.
When he talked of the 6 types of bodhicitta, he was talking of the 6 perfections or paramitas.
근데 제 어디 너나 택바 침부가 람 용속대 장주그 심 그 이와 참도 왔어.
So in brief, he was introducing bodhicitta as every single pathway to enlightenment is a pathway of bodhicitta.
아니 니라 이와 니자 용을 값은 근접 장주그 심다 돈담 장축 그 셈. 근데 야 되니까 손이 그랬어.
And when he talked of the two types of bodhicitta, he was referring to the relative truth and the ultimate truth, being relative and ultimate bodhicitta.
아니 대랑 아초고 해야도 좀 군줍 장축 그 셈고 나라 몬비 장축 um바 장축 그 셈다 주바 장축 그 셈. 어디가니 쉬어야 해.
And so today's teaching is mainly about the relative bodhicitta. And within the relative bodhicitta, there's the aspiring bodhicitta and the engaging bodhicitta.
근데 나리 반신지 장축 그 셈도 서로 들리세나 도덕제니 해용도 당 측가리송 요르잖아. 당보 동니 닝지 닝보제 지금 측대요래. 다등이 켈라들 피어 말이나 당보 강레스나 동반이 당 닝지 니 일메 봐. 동반이 강하지 닝지 닝보제. 닝보제는 그 자와 닝지 임바. 디지 그 동니 닝지 닝보제한테 장치고 셈다 서로 똑똑 소리잖아. 찍그나 서로 뒤나 때려서.
And when he distilled all of the bodhicittas to one explanation, his words were, the heart essence of emptiness is compassion. The heart emptiness of compassion is emptiness. This is the real meaning of bodhicitta.
Tati kualen kabuyoris. Nacho kusemo samba zambojiari, mala pantogari. The tombani can ningbu, tony ningji ningbu chanse. That ningji tin ningbu yena, ko tombani danyam to dodo zoga happy kariana samya. This samlo de jaji korkris.
Which is difficult to understand because we think of bodhicitta as the kind heart, as helping others, and then we hear that it's the essence of emptiness. So how does bodhicitta make sense as emptiness?
Ayana 장쇼고 셈때 장게 삼바장보 제야 소수무티 기보 정야 말라 판도야시 그 대리시 그 돈다지나 닝제게 닝고전세와 가사면은 되겠어.
So we understand bodhicitta as that kind heart that brings happiness and helps others. We don't even need to define it as the heart essence of compassion. That's clear.
옛날야 나도 때랑 책바 친구가 람지 따와 망지 오 상마대 장초구 셈데 야피가서 장초구 셈데 야 친구지 임바데 계랑서 셈나라 당보니 학구구 요레스.
But today, in discussing the Mahayana view and that the essence of all pathways to Mahayana enlightenment are emptiness, it's important from the beginning for all of us to understand its real meaning.
Tata konsa choko galop ting nangla, chonne lama, chonne yedam, chonne yin kanru chuchung te, songdi, lama yedam kanru chuchung, changma tartuna changchoku semri, songsang.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama just in this video was saying that you are the Lama, you are the Yidam, you are the Dakini and the Dharma protectors. All of these are bodhicitta by true nature.
아니 대랑아서 때 때자마 나 올라때 이게 요리 따지마 쳐서 때 양결에서 아마 직리에서 가야 그래서 그냥 가지리리니 가지르지거나 뒤쪽은 나가 말이에요.
So that video we saw, it's subtitled, so if you have the chance to watch it again, you can pay attention to those words, but we don't have time to go through the whole translation of it.
담보 공산 쪽보다 깔롭대 나한테 맞을 때랑 장초고 생고 거때 나라 샤야가 거급 정하대 깔와상 보리 결혼서 그 장초고 심라 롭종 제야대 깔와상 보리 손이 힘송아스 믹치당까 힘세로.
So we heard in this video with His Holiness saying that today to be teaching bodhicitta, one is so fortunate. And for us to be hearing of bodhicitta, we are so fortunate.
근데 공산적 찍고 말이 와서 그 라마 마보시 아니 장축고 생고에 대해서 장축고 생고 있는 저 대용되고 근데 흉니 그 믹스 땅이 근데 흉큰 배 망보여레스 나도 라마 나다 남기.
And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is not the only one to cry teaching bodhicitta. Many of Khenpo's lamas, when talking of bodhicitta and its benefits, will cry when they talk about it. But today Khenpo won't cry.
옛날에 저때 김선지 요레스 때 김선지 요레스
But there is a good reason for that.
그래서는 장쇼고 심지와데 문이 좀 누바친부시 미 셈가 땡란절 소나 좀 믹서 같은 포랑 같이 셈 이르와 트위아가 차주식이 오비 다들 라마테서 오 디제위 노르고좀 보체 나진데 뭐 참말라야 나 간다 양보 요사를 삼니니 아니 데라 믹서 그런타 지금 통고 요레스 어디 지금 싱글 되는 힘이 요레스.
Because bodhicitta is something so powerful and something that connects to the very deepest, our innermost heart mind. And when lamas are teaching about bodhicitta, which is such a precious jewel, they're wishing that that value of bodhicitta, that is our mind, could be, enjoyed by all sentient beings. So we'll be inspired to tears.
맞아. 받은 다와 작바고 엄마 죽바고 원아 동반이 그 추대 투니 리기 바로 당와당 미미 추만 죽바당 양당 좋아 어디 특지겨 봐 텔라 적보 상기로 이 사본이고 그지게 동반이 당 니지게 추대 투니 아니 셈라스 지금 저와 친구들 미친 동야라서 봐 좋아데 디 나라 장적고 싱글烂子呢去个烂那些有比大概送有的
And there are verses in Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka teaching about bodhicitta, when he's talking of bodhicitta as the union of compassion and emptiness, and when that's experienced, it literally transforms the mind, and that's, it comes out in tears. It's like the moisture of bodhicitta is actually, becomes manifest in human tears when it's experienced.
And they mind bangi nature papa tomit 그 song yoga bumi 세요래 가리 다다 난질 조비스 약간 보러 왔다 용 자친구 히어로 어때 몰라 믹서 그 다다 그래 다 대다일 용 대다일 용 대 뻗망고 히어리 단절 나나요.
So Khenpo was reading one of the great texts by Asanga, which is about the Yogacharya Madhyamaka view. It's a great text that Khenpo was reading.
디나라 샹추신바그 릭사바그다 멍부신 소리.
Riksarpa.
릭사다 릭스야데 어디 릭. 내가 샤프닝보 릭시거라. 세야 세스나 인사야나 세야 릭세라고 그러나.
And Asanga talks of bodhicitta as being like the awakening of knowledge. It's like something that had been obscured and it becomes, awakened or enlightened.
No, they are also 장적구심라 다바지와 무바지와 심구당이 장적구심고 용던투네 믹스 그 초로한 당한테 가포침부지야. 대청마 내가 소지 기와 공마야 장적구심다. 내려와요 딱 연송도.
And so when we hear the teachings of bodhicitta, and it's this quality and benefit that is now and at all times, and we hear of this, great teaching, it connects us to something that is primordial, bodhicitta, which is.
Oui. 다텐디 간다 이런 가지고 서로 해야 돼. 장적 생군념을 해라. 맞아. 닝지다 장적 생녀 찍받자니 말이야. 찍바 말이야.
So today's teaching, which aims to be practical, it's important to understand that compassion and bodhicitta are not exactly the same thing.
럼반다오이나 장축생 럼반토야다. 닝지데 고 장축생 그 망지리스. 나와리스. 닝지 장바데 장축생 나비요 말.
So compassion is of course important, but if we're talking of bodhicitta, there are levels of awakening, and compassion in general is more like just the base level of bodhicitta. Even the word bodhicitta is a special word, the mind of enlightenment. We have to think about the word itself. The word bodhicitta indicates that it's this essential pathway. It is the direct pathway to that unsurpassed level of complete awakening. As a people. Again, the word bodhicitta, the word chitta or mind, is referring to our own mind now, this mind we have, and to its complete fruition of awakening, that bodhi. And so it's the mind, our mind now, which we cultivate and eventually ripens as full enlightenment bodhi.
And godon nibade kanresena jangchu yang yimba di jangchu ko rangjin ki se khoran ko ngo jangchu charwa ge semde jangsen drama thama ma ji gyeon dang ji ma dak da dang ji dai chi da de ge wa ji ma de zo chama pa de jangsen clean je cha ani chupsena yondan chama de chro nyang rangil la de yuan da yong si zhu ba de la chu la go o de da wi sin ji la jiang zhu sin la.
And then jiangzhu, or awakening, enlightenment, literally the jiang part of that means that purification, that removal of all the obscurations and confusion. And then the chu means that complete culmination of all the qualities of enlightenment. So it's that perfect completion of potential.
When
we talk of bodhicitta and we say ultimate bodhicitta, this has to do with the practice within Dzogchen.
Jupchin Sarahaba ge song sig nang la gang li sudang nyangen din chu wa yijin non ji sem la chang cha lo song yo de da sig de dog dog jena norna yin gi nor bu da wi jang chu ge sem de la chang cha lo song ni kong ki changja ching bo ge ka se ya din song yo de jang chu ge sem ji de be chet dang ni de la chang cha lo gong chu ji je Sarahaba.
So this great Mahasiddha, Sarahapa, his verse said that he praises that wish-fulfilling jewel, which is bodhicitta. So even within the Mahamudra context, it's indicated that bodhicitta is that complete awakening.
Ini tawi tiga jangchuk semde aga so ya la jangchuk semde dambu de dada namgyun na so yong da ka sha tang jena yakso shambang gombo zat bi ngontok jang ka na semki pan yando ichir yang tak zog bi jangchuk ndo so wa ba phamne chila pi yumba o de 다 장적 그 문제야. 천일 때때리스. 당가 그 그래서 로종 지든 천일 때와도 빼 갈침 보러 와. 천일 땅글 담배 제고 여기
Maitreya, in his treatise, The Ornament of Clear Realization, he talks of bodhicitta as that wish to attain perfect enlightenment for the sake of others.
Tenderis, Tendayenza, he took down what the simple needs, and a Johnson of the simple the candidates, and oh, Corona Chachu Niores, Chachu the Zenton shirts, Randut Savani Maimba, Zendi Donla Mikpi Simba. Zendon de Antango Niba Yomari, Yandon Corang Mil de Chenima. Any Miguel Nibade, data with Simpson the Chedu, the Dang Simpson that Niku Pantaya, Zandan, Jimbataya, Zandan, Robatia, Zamaimber. So Jigu Compantoya Chedu Robatia. What did they need Chachu de Dana? Any Dick Bodhichitta, the Garancha is.
So this verse of Maitreya has two parts to it. So one is the aspect of bodhicitta, which is oriented towards others. It's for the sake of others. Bodhicitta is for the sake of others. And the other orientation of bodhicitta is for complete enlightenment. And we can't say that one is more important than the other, but bodhicitta is for the sake of others. So, we aim to practice patience and generosity and all of these things to help others. But then that goal is that complete enlightenment. That orientation is for complete enlightenment to help others.
Data Chancho Sim de la Yavachena. Jadanga Mambo Yorite, Nikup Naso, Litambo, Lojonchi pickups. Dondum Chancho Simsa the Yugo Paris. Dondum Chancho Simsa the Satambo Gaps, Yananda Lamita. Zobachimu Simu Jani, Gilanguni, Ripangun Trona, take out Tondum Chancho Simgila Kiris. Just don't as Namjin Tartina, Tatangazo Chogala, Tini, Yancho Simpi Dombale Gapsa, Monjuk Sentini, the Eucharist, Monjuk Senti. Monbar Senti, Jupasinti.
Okay. So when we talk of bodhicitta in these terms, like in a practical sense, we can understand that there's ultimate bodhicitta, but ultimate bodhicitta is from the first bhumi onwards. So when like a lama, like an accomplished practitioner, when the accomplished practitioner truly recognizes the nature of their mind, the true nature of reality, that's the first bhumi, and then it can become the ultimate bodhicitta. But the more general terms, we can understand when we're taking the bodhisattva vow in front of the shrine and so forth, and we're generating aspiring bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta. This is the relative practical.
Tenda indi te tawi changsho ku simti chonjuk lego tangbo ku kapsu rower ndo tang rowa yi shepchak chotar sipatar tejin kipin deni ti shepchak rangjin sipar sha songate monchu ku simti ni jeshit te yongchak changma kilin ya gesirwa 지금 jeshit te chonjuk lego tangbo ku nang la songate res.
And in the first chapter of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara by Shantideva, he explains aspiring bodhicitta as the aspiration to go, and engaging bodhicitta as the actual going somewhere.
아니, 대양 배고 고는 저시 나와 인장 배고 되어 요레스. 저 당그 전주 그 책만 치와 고되어레스. 대난진 진디 저시 때 자시시와라 배 측리라고 지그 배가 토는 저시 잡요라 다 넘바 참마 때 지그 고모고 강을 요 말레스.
Which is a very easy metaphor, and generally most of Shantideva's teaching uses a lot of very easy to understand examples when he's teaching bodhicitta.
다 마스 체남비 나나야 지 감바군이 추망보 신그 냠래 약보나 찬근 배샤비 약보 용그 망보요 다 이나가 응오시 그 매장 다 지당 긴로당 따르 말은 저시 자마 통 넘버 4 그 지군이 그 셈그낭라 똑바카리요 바타 단단지 샤타고요 말레스 데 예나야다 데다 저질링 값이나 양수수수 게르고 똑바데 주토랑아서 데다 드라마 지야리 다다야나 마지 차르젠 근로다 치니 자저 그 생고 그디가 가사데 야야레스.
Right. So there are, other treaties that are incredibly profound and difficult that do teach about the nature of bodhicitta. Khenpo says that he doesn't know those very well, but he wants to be able to really clear our doubts and answer our questions when we get to the discussion part. And so he wants to deliver the teaching of bodhicitta in a way that's quite, accessible.
Oi. Pena meeting Hasala, Drogo, nothing as Nam Yidri Javiore, and one royalty the Tabri Jayate, or to come down to the Lasado, said the Gamutin and Rosa Tachi in that Pay Yan Songre Cambilamate. Lasala and Dro wanted Dana, Tambos to sound on the Tabri chair, and you Churchin that Korea the Cadiona de Korea Tabri, patient Diargona, Kormunda Yargona, Sandro Chegorva. 어때데 몸바신 기세와데 가다로 조든 하산로야라 sem당이 탁자닝은 루인 상역을 로탁자야디 몸바신 기그 빼레도 아니 오니 고바잡니 콤바리리 제는 로이jak바데 죽바 sem질라고요 데페레 근데 나긴체 니 sem진 탐체게 체도 상지고 콤바 토퍼 샤고 히엠바 어디로데 저당 몸바신 기차가요 디그 체도 데니 미스 semchen tam ko ma tobe chedo ni lam paru de chimba tu nyam se leng ye nyam ba de tati de la buyorwa gela tam chawa jikden dribu la tam chawa jikden dribu samti ko ma top chao nyam ba de momba sinki de dribu la tam chawa la ani ti chetong ni lam paru de ni ga ta dong us laglen che yo ma da laglen che wa yim bi chawa yo ma nga ta ti chedo lam gyode parudo chimba tuginza parudo chimba tugla nyams lengi nyambate mom jupa senti chakres.
The classic example that from where Khenpo comes from in Tibet they like to use is going to Lhasa. So Lhasa being the great pilgrimage destination, those from Kham will talk about aspiring bodhicitta is like aspiring to go to Lhasa. So you've decided in your mind that you're making the journey and there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. You need to cultivate resources, maybe save some money and plan. But in your heart, you have decided that you're going. So that complete commitment, that decision that I am going is like the aspiring bodhicitta. So in our hearts, in our minds, we've really decided that for the sake of others, I am going to attain enlightenment. I am generating the mind of bodhicitta. So it's a commitment to the fruition of enlightenment. And then it doesn't necessarily mean we're acting as bodhisattvas, but it's that commitment to the enlightenment. Whereas the actual engagement, the commitment to practicing the 6 paramitas is the engaging bodhicitta.
Umba jukpa labjakba na ta nguni ti laglen ka kablan jukte paru de simba tu nyam lena tan jukpa sinji yinda yin tan jukpa sinji muni ge koran che laglen rang ta koni jukpa sinji chabares.
So we of the aspiring and the engaging bodhicitta, then of course obviously once one is an actual bodhisattva engaged in acts of bodhicitta, then this is engaging.
Yana charang ta don laglen la manjuk bi kaps tambo na nga so chusok ka nang la nga so nyam de cha chu sim che yin lam na ya ti kaw sa ya ndor na ti ngi gyu paru de sim ba tu nyam sa leng ge yin nyam de sam lo te yo ba kaw su tin ju ba sim che chak de yo res
Mon bisem ju bisem
ju bisim chak.
Okay, but when we even in the inspiring, say for example we're in a dharma center and we're reciting verses of the 6 paramitas and the bodhisattva vow to engage in those 6 paramita practices, this is also an engagement. This is an engaging bodhicitta.
Ni ta terang nga so gon din ni ya ya ni te kare yin sana ta hun dru ngang don tarlam rafsa mo pong rom bo che ga song a di nang ki tinkit ge chich chig yore 대당 대전도는 롱진 뜻 공주 나름 양바지 여러 가지 용작 어딘 나는 지거리 어디니까 쉬어레스 이 당니 이제 시작나 맞은 뭔가 상간당 대소라 갑득라 디 측지지 보던데 보나 판독 요래 옹이 때다든 이렇게 잡히는라.
And so Khenpo, to kind of focus this teaching on bodhicitta for the sake of all of us here, is going to teach from the verses in the liturgy for the preliminary practice. So Mipam Rinpoche's Ngundro, or preliminary text to the path of liberation.
Yes, path of liberation. Tati nana tambu simkik kapsu jitar disum gyalwa siji 장점 쪽도 특느 개바달 나그냥 같이 로건 다시셔 라메 장점 쪽도 심기도 송그레스.
So this is one of the common versions of the Longchen Ningpik Ngondro, and one of the first verses begins, as the Buddhas of the three times and their children cultivated the supreme mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta, so do I cultivate supreme unsurpassed bodhicitta to liberate all beings that fill the reaches of space.
근데 강따라 장초그 생구 냠는데 단디나나 원주 뒤송고 상지 좀 되는 남지 상점 쪽도 샘께 봐서 어딘가 저 샘께 그 돈발렘비 값을 담보 저전화 주비 상지 당상 좀 샘바 탐저 당 삽질라 니비 상주 샘바 소고요 어때제도 소소고 저기 장초그 샘께하고 유르데 아니 야와시 당지 바시 니가 그 시데 장주 샘바 조래 장주 상지당 상지 저기 장주 샘바 탐치라 아니 돈도 삼로 당니더니 어다 때나비체 따라 향좀 저도 그 주특기 요바 난센세니 되니 니장다 카첩 로건진 로센진 탐치고 돈도 되니 향좀 저도 센티기 연세가 다데 다다 공도시 비 몽바센키 어디 차게요레스.
And so this verse, much like when we take the actual Bodhisattva vow, we're calling as witnesses on all of the Buddhas of the 10 directions, all of the Bodhisattvas on the 10 bhumis to Buddhahood as our witnesses. And we're making this commitment of bodhicitta that for the sake of others, we will attain the unsurpassed awakening. And this is generating the aspiring bodhicitta.
Oi. Tenda indi ta Teta we chancho sim rangi julatena. Ti kamni zonte ranye chancho simbare soni. Patrum ande chunjugana song yores. Ranye chancho simbare song yores.
And once we have given rise to such an aspiring bodhicitta, then Shantideva says in his teaching that we become a bodhisattva with that in our mind stream.
Tate la pena chunjugana la tiji yorwa tata. 장초 심기 결나 까지 기 코로 종를 담비 냠탁남 대샤가 남지 시시 조샤상 직딜 남을 깊이 샤시는 줄 책된지 지거레스.
And Shantideva, he has this verse that it says, should bodhicitta come to birth in those who suffer, chained in samsara, just in that single instant of bodhicitta, they are called the children of the Buddha, and revered by all in the world, by gods, and all in the humankind.
근데 정선 강을에서나 티가 단델란델을 속이요. 저런 결랑 윤던때 향주신 윤던 청마대 다동 게면나요. 저런 그 썸로데 뭐잠바 청마가 썸로리 야지 갈차리 썸로고 넌 썸로고 ren당 침보시 저런 요레스. 제장 디갑스 믹스 그 ren당 요 염증데레스.
And so this is just expressing that even though one might not actually have the qualities of a bodhisattva in one's being, in one's character, but still with that aspiring bodhicitta, the mind has surpassed in value just the ordinary mind of ordinary humans. So for this reason, it's so praiseworthy.
근데 땅에서 원이 좋아하는 나타다 강라양 때 공산적이야 송도아 그러나 저거 총총이 나야 그런 저거 돼서 산이 남바야 뭐지 라고요 저거 당냠도 좀 못했니 나와 찌보 차고요나 남바야 뭐지 라고요 나요 Semba Zamboche. And in Majan Samji, Majan Dedula Samlo Tangantiana, Truguting Ambayabora Crison to us.
And as His Holiness said in the video, that even children, if children want to, have their playmates like them and to be given more presence, to have that kind heart, that bodhicitta earns you more presence. Likewise, if you want to have a good appearance or be more likable, bodhicitta is the way to do it. So.
They wouldn't render. When I'm Makashi, not so chong gas in that Java, they so did the Yuri. Java Kahila, there's a long tower. Cachate, the Matochi, Goena, Chig Lamson, Koran to Proton Chanro as you are. That drew on the huge to get down to judge so marite. Didn't tell a no young but some Gadina yet mobile goodies. Just same get chambers in the Dudu. Tell a no young but can't check master, Koran Gadina, watching into your work of records. Because so the boat is all a catty and the song, checking young Hugity, the Semba Ducha Mayana, call a symbols over it.
So this Khenpo is just remembering in the monastery with all the young monks, this is really kind of apparent. So you might have young monks and their character is just a bit short-tempered and kind of easily annoyed. That type of person just, tends to sort of bump up against people and has trouble just being in harmony with others. Whereas those monks that were kind of more relaxed and often thought of others and just had a more open mind towards others, they had kind of a happier disposition and not easily annoyed. So it's you can really see this in society.
Some ngaso with the Simba Kusuk Tobote, Ngaso la diction Mambo Zuni, Ngaso with Tina Parchu Yakiondos.
And we can feel the minds, tightening just when there's a lot of conscriptions, like restrictions put upon the mind and a lot of pressure on the mind. Already the thought for others becomes smaller.
That young Chisokun Jortanchina,
when we live in a society, we definitely do need organization and regulations, to be sure. But we can easily get too uptight about things. Khenpo's noticed when he rides in the train, in the quiet carriage, that sometimes there might only be like one or two people in that quiet carriage. It's pretty quiet, but somebody else just speaks a little bit and one person can become quite upset by it.
Yeah, tell me already. Think when you can't tati gamna danga kosombo gosang your tati in the Kayomar. Casite Mars Tatino the trigger with the dinner you must on a bed that change you wishing the Tony. Then it's also stated the reader was so yakadu. Not how to do the much money to the race, yeah.
Yeah, there could be two situations there. Like sometimes people really don't respect others' choice for silence, but then sometimes people choose the silence, but it can be very kind of uptight about it so that the mind is small and that we're easily annoyed. So.
Then I think also some don't change region mandawa, some low don't mandawa, Tindi Mugir Komshi mandawa Tetsola. Tanglin Matapa down, so that's a shooting with you, but they down, then the juncture saying Yamlin. The Tobia, Matop down, the Chanchos and Yamlin, the paint direction products.
And it's also, this whole talk of bodhicitta becomes very apparent when we look in society at different cultures and different, customs, habits. When these start to interact, our ability to tolerate and to be able to, learn from others' practices really has a lot to do with the practice of bodhicitta.
Garasana Chanshub Sangun Yamnis Dog Siena, Majan Antambo Jayaris. Majan Senadata, you Jen Antambo, Janda Antambo Jayatiritus.
The because bodhicitta, in a nutshell, really is the thought for others. It's thinking of others. That is bodhicitta.
But the
So this is quite relevant.
Tata teaching the Shiva li chonju ke nala takarang songore. Zeri janla nunse mangs. Zeri sewa de karasi kada chi mandik pa chi semba kusuk tokbo chengin de la no pa de pe mangbo yongore. De chonju ke tsik takarang yore.
There's a exactly about this that says keep its mind. There's always something that bothers that type of person.
Tenda indi ngato jansu kusen gunyale pe na me gamba yananda me lo chembo yana te na yin za chang re nam re ta chik so lo manda wa yin di samu tong shok mo bo shi me jomba tang lo chong te so da manda wa yung yo di manda we hewa de la ga ji jing so ga dang zhen de che wa yo na de zam shi sen dang pan zeng ge par la nyam ni jia la kang re chak yo re.
You know, another example is that just the kind of mindsets of older people, more mature people tend to be different than that of young folks. But it's really the degree to which people are self-grasping that makes the difference of older and younger people being able to be in harmony together.
Ta te tau ji che bai na te mo yan ji ji chorwa la sang xi sa ji ni xiep chak bu go ni mo yan ji de du dang chorwa dang chowa de so la ni ji sam lo dang ya go xi cha de ri ji ni xiang chu ge sem se wa de dang bu jie yong de jie che san ni sim jin pan ji la bu yo re de la ling ge tok lan ro yong de chong sa ni so so ge nang ma ni go zu ge ya de be ya be ga chin bo re.
So it's really important to start local, because when we're thinking of others and dealing with others, there's a lot of people's feelings and ways of thinking and sensitivities to negotiate. So we feel the bodhicitta, and it's very vast, and it encompasses all sentient beings, but it's really important to just begin with the people in our immediate home and environment.
Germany na Europe 그다라 다테 종인다 문이 히라시마 Europe 그다다 예수 주강식은 나 아니 예수도 되니 라마 딱 건설을 라마식으로 와 주본 된리식 그 고동 딱 로세난다 버감지요레스 버금디 강라 이게 직지요레스 다팅 이게 되는 보이게 나는 통조래 불감세나데 로데 죽사게 감지거와 디나라 강라 이게 치티레스 아 이게 디 가르치 선세나 당보 맞춰종 그 값이나 되니 다 베나 야콥데 약보치고 상가 되니 상로베요스 되니 갈레 타오디 탈로 손주 유치 렙디다 다틴딩 메둑 상네 가수 소소 베나 가데라고 사샤데 되니 름기로 다 던치 야치를 단직문도 소소고 종바데 약보치고 흔들스 다 되니 야로 자치 급출을 단직문도 나랑 나라데 되니 가만 치랑 가데라 딱 나랑 소소 당보 딱딱 지고 흔들상야데 남겨건 니룩 자치 보지래 된 코까지 가르라 거잖아 코 타마데 맞도데 니룩데 하고 마스스 다 마음바나 있는 문이 저런 건 잠불랑 약보치고나 당보 소수 약합 약보치고는 소소가 사차구나 소소고 종바 약보치고는 소소는 김치긴 데와 대 약보치고는 소소 나무데 약보치 나무 약보치고는 당보 소소데 약보치야 다가랑 마토 탑블만 두세야 돼 그거 라요를 라고 두세 대 니루베 다이 장쪽 생고 냠래야 름반다가랑 레스.
So Khenpo heard an anecdote. Well, he didn't see it for himself, but at probably a Christian church in Germany, in Europe, there was a coffin of a great Christian priest, saint. And Khenpo saw a Tibetan translation of this inscription on the coffin that said, when he was a young man, his thoughts were for the good of his country, of his nation. But as he matured and he was about 30 or 40 years old, he started to recognize that that wasn't the best approach. He had to think more about his own province. And then as he became older, he narrowed his focus more to when he was 70 or 80, he realized the best action was for his village. He could do the most for his village. And then as he was 80 or 90, he started to focus more on his family. And then on his deathbed, he recognized that the most effective action was for him to understand his own self-nature. And Khenpo really appreciated this because it really shows the actual order of practicing bodhicitta. If we really want to help the nation and the world, and we really want to help our own province, our own town, our own family, we really need to begin, transforming one's own mind.
Tonight, the town the chance of Simseva, the Gerkin Tory Nanguni, Nyamsalang, and the Nyamlin Tati Karsipora. Laglin Tony Tsering Tashi, then he must yan lapin, Mr. Take a single tape. Shukin tape yours, Pantoku yours.
Yes, so if we really do want to engage in the acts of a bodhisattva and really manifest the full potential of a bodhisattva, then we need to practice the bodhicitta. And with that transformation, we will find that naturally one can be more influential over others. Naturally, we get the ability to help others and to help transform others.
Adishai, Joji Pada Adishai in Saru. Lomatizo Gumdana Sondi, ya, Sambazanguchi, so Titik de Garon, Sungris. Simbayabuchi, so we are. That is Chanju Sing Yamlin there.
It's in the words of my perfect teacher, the story of how Atisha's disciples would go to Atisha for the most profound advice. And he would always say, practice the kind heart, have a kind heart. That is the practice of bodhicitta, is having a kind heart.
Dear Patu Rumbuchega song, Patu Rumbuchi song Samaya Borate, song Siori, the Mingla, Tongta Bargi Tamsera. That Tongtasina, Tomer Giva, Bad Giva, Tamer Giva, Tamsina, the Jig, Lashit, the rest. There's
a teaching of a really good teaching of Patrul Rinpoche's. Of course, all of Patrul Rinpoche's teachings are very good, but one in particular that's probably translated into English that you know is the pith advice for the beginning, the middle, and the end.
If
you're familiar with such a teaching. It's a Patrul Rinpoche's advice for the beginning, the middle, and the end. Just nod your head or put up your hand.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Just, okay. Di nangla kare song yor senona. Lob jong, rangi loond jong. Jangchu semki rangi lo jong na. Linga gewa, nachig masi jang. Harbo lamlin chuksa yori kang. Lojong se boy que dans la paix, c'est que n'y boyore. Tamani kong son de wa. Lojong. Lojong sena. Nyamlenki la viorata. Prakti karise ona tere injigang oteres.
There's this wonderful verse by Patrul Rinpoche that it comes across really well in the Tibetan, especially the first line, because it sounds like he's really, really calling people to action. And it says, train the mind, train your own mind in bodhicitta.
Kartis, ding amala, chanchup kartida yomardeta, tonda yore. Chanchup semgo lo jangnas, karti chorang chanchup semgo nyamle rango lo de jangnas.
And then if you train your mind with bodhicitta,
lunga gewa nachig masijang. Nguni ga kalisho chi partasa kalisho chi jamni chi gewa joku yondo ko cheke mena yang. Tabi lam kana la tata ko charon rojem bares.
So if we train our mind with bodhicitta, even if we are unable to actually accomplish a single virtue through body and speech, like if we're not able to do these wondrous acts of really helping others, but still we will accomplish the benefits of self and others effortlessly.
Chapter the Tonsang Perna, Chig Zalong Nyamlin Sandra, Zoching Nyamlin Sandra, Chig Tintigo Google Dantina, Yikin Damada Yori, Tenichi Gar in Drawota, no shop parties or mixer get the current sugar, not chew down, Pojin Norton get into the Sanhaka, Nyamlin Chair, young Jabjong Mero, the Chapter Yoris, Nite and Chenabala, Tata Mirk Injik Kasame, Yenda take Korang. Region Korang Jabjong that the things are book in the Gomshi Jabjong, you'll be poverty so go down. Teni Chejar down Jarik, Tendra, the Pojan Nongton down Sang down Zoching Yamlin, Jabjong Megenti, so there's a little how we are teaching true tip of Chaparchi Yoris. Yanka Chesong Yoris, that Yamlin Jebi Gaps, Yanka Manyon Dukes.
When it comes to practicing, there's always a lot of potential for us to get things wrong and to make mistakes, especially for Westerners and, people who aren't coming from a strong Tibetan cultural background for the Tibetan Buddha Dharma. Nowadays we hear of Tsalung, we hear of Dzogchen, we can learn these teachings, we can go on Google and there's so many texts available. But without that strong cultural support, it can be, we have to be careful. There's dangers of misunderstanding.
Entry Devi Janchakusim the Nyamlin Jena, so go lamp Gorsan Yongyat, Lamte the Nontra Choria, the Nyon Royal, Janchakusim Nyamlin Te, but the Pantochichuris.
When it comes to, for the English speakers, the best practice that's probably the least prone to going off track or to misunderstanding it, the best practice is the practice of bodhicitta.
Chenambe Hakogres, Pato Rumboche, Kanzalami Shalonganana, Lama Tensor, Tambo Lama, Tenlang Kipa, Parda Lama, Tambo Lama, Taglang Kipa, Parda Lama, Tenlang Kipa, Tama Gonchut Lang Kipa, you in the Yandam Luson, Kantara. Tambo lama taxi jetan, teri lama tientan, tama lama gunduni chushuni nyamlen jetan kor, nyokta tsawoshi dan teri kali kaposhi, which is on yours.
So we've heard the instructions. First one relies on a teacher or a lama, and then one can rely on the teachings, and then one can come to rely on the true meaning of those words, of those teachings. And then, we're meant to check up and to find a qualified lama. And then we have to take, various teachings and things from the lama. And it can be very problematic and challenging, all of that.
Tama tena ta kongi kareson yoresina lama ta ninjin di noni. Lama ta yaga tablam lama taxi jegoya ta pakali yorwa ta tama de Lama di gula chanchuk sim yume tegarangla to you son yoris.
So in the words of my perfect teacher, it talks about checking up on the lama, and there are various approaches and ways to properly check a lama, and it can be quite complicated, but what it teaches us is that one thing you can know for sure is a good lama is one that has bodhicitta. Khenpo
제가 장초구 셈데 길라요나 장초구 셈 길라용 그 라마데가 라미용의 양바 요메 강타량 디가 뭐 yar라데 고거를 주지가 말이스 셈 땡니 판도하가 삼로 용거리스 어때다 메시가 가셔야 돼 간르이나 판도거리.
So regardless of a lama's other types of knowledge and talents, we know that if they genuinely have bodhicitta, they're trustworthy, that with their words and with their actions, they're not going to deceive or to harm others.
저런데 때나 지난배 학국으로 와 조지 바다 아드샤 라마리 좀 돈바 콩글로 말이 옛날에 조지 바다 아디샤 운용 나용디 공용용디 갈송스 당다 좀 ngala ndromde adihya gelongre ndrom jidang gimhinre nacho tangsan yana ya garson se tonda kong loma chimba pela joji adihya garson ngala ni chorang lagba de ni gotok la jang ngala chenlap na chi
Atisha ki drum thombala tisungri.
Oh yeah garson chorang la semba zambo yore ngala pantokores.
So we know of Jo Atisha, Lord Atisha. And Atisha was a gelong, or a fully ordained monk. And his disciple was Dromtompa. He was a teacher, but a lay teacher. And one day Atisha had a terrible headache. But he said to Dromtompa, please place your hands on my head. Because you have a kind heart, you'll give a blessing, a healing blessing to me.
아니 춘정랑이 jel라 이게 지 당시 그다
La solepson.
어때게 지 차식 동로 간사람이 하는 측대가 all 세야지 다
Okay, so straight out of
for action can say change 통성회
Khenpo
당가 영상말이
Khenpo, there's a verse from the words of my perfect teacher that Khenpo wants to share, and while he's more than capable of reciting it himself, he's holding it up. So it says, all action consistent with the aims of a holy teacher, truly engaged in the activity of bodhicitta and accumulating merit and wisdom. All efforts to serve him, carry his messages, or even sweep his floor will be fruitful. This is the best path of accumulating. So it's a bit like the story that Khenpo just told of Atisha.
아니 나초 가르 빠트rum부치 가르치니 타마테 domsik자우리다 당보 빠트rum부치 당보 대pe 깔리 갖고 송요리 다 지금랑바가 연너rum부치 졸라서 비나라 가르 송와나진 송래 다 타마텔라 지당 메시게 다 대참마 랑렌체고나 갖고요로 왔당서 다 나초 라마 딱사나 나초 딱에 코라티 삼티 시럽 코랑 요 말에 고르컵이 요 말에 티츠 요 말에 다 지금 마부 쉬워지 그래 라마라 요도 요짱 통야 니와 요 말에 다 가르치고 그래라디 타마텔라 빠두rum부치 그 돔로디 때 돔로스나라 도도치나 디나지 자요 내가 가서 남나 망액 납고 망액이야 라마테야 망액 라마타야 망액이래.
And so even Patrul Rinpoche himself had taken these teachings from the profound teachings of Jigme Lingpa, and here we are trying to really understand bodhicitta and to practice it properly, and we don't have the wisdom, we don't have the maybe access to the same teachings, we don't necessarily have the time. So it's quite challenging to be sure we're practicing it properly, but Patrul Rinpoche assures us with like the verse we just heard that we can be completely confident in a nutshell if bodhicitta is present. It's reliable.
근데 인디 항상 아주 길긴치기나 데려와 땡상이나 뺑상자바이나 길긴치기나 소사가 로마데라 문이 로야가스 야보말라 teni nangla personi kupesha thorbalani lap tendi chenken mabu yorwa tenda pen nangli chemjang nang soni la ya ni dasang chemjang de kormo yongken chigena teni kormo mangba ta ko ya ta sacha mabu la tendi ngda yor yergin la shiun gor shiun li jang karchewa de chetang ge yang jamji ge ni ningji da samba zangbo laksam nam da yo go ya de cha ge yores ta de chok ko nani na to chama ki le ya sik cha ge yores.
This is an advice, a really pith advice that's incredibly relevant for our day and age in society, that, there might be spiritual teachers that have a lot of knowledge and a lot of qualities and they can teach quite expertly. But if it doesn't come with the right intention, we can see sometimes there's teaching for money or there's teaching with discrimination, for higher students or lower students. But we can be sure, or what we're really looking for is that intention for others, that altruistic mind of love and compassion.
That page is about nga dini chena ba te chi sam so kartan kubar parchi ni chi tang yo ta te jabje ngachirum bu chi ta we na ta nga zo chi lama gamba ta nga zo musin je yo ba na ni chena bi yang parchi mangbu gen ji nyo se kre menna yang nam jin kong bu song ten ri ta kong ta we na ni ta chang chu sen gu nyam le na ken res.
And Khenpo has shared 2 photos of him with Garchen Rinpoche. So today, Garchen Rinpoche is still alive, a Lama that many of you might have met, that we can still meet. And he's always teaching Bodhicitta, and he's a genuine, real embodied practitioner of Bodhicitta. So that's one photo. Khenpo Parnamba Shi Tenagembe.
Parte so ma tang ni ni tie da nyam de xie xiang zhe ge yang parte so dan yang.
So we can keep showing all 4 photos, and Khenpo will explain. Khenpo chira nam jelsong Garchen Rinpoche.
Ore nga zhe we na chi dang ge dang bo de dang Garchen Rinpoche na je ya de ta de le zhong rinpo xing do ngi nie chen Garchen Rinpoche ge song zo mi xia ya de ka yin na nie chen Garchen Rinpoche ta na ni lu ni de wo chi ji ni Garchen Rinpoche ge lama jing bo yo ba gong zhu Rinpoche ge lama jiang bo ge chu che ji bo yi ge dang ni是一个家里一个族里呢叠几占名词叠几占名词
Garchen Rinpoche get some yoris.
Garchen Rinpoche送的那个叠族讲的
So basically, Garchen Rinpoche, over the last 2 years, Khenpo has been writing a book that's about Garchen Rinpoche's teaching. And his teaching is based on Jamgon Kongtrul's calling the Lama from afar, supplication prayer. So Khenpo has been writing a book about Garchen Rinpoche's commentary on that prayer.
Garchen Rinpoche送的被这当个拿钱给干的，等你公路通过的，等你送的被肉巴的那人，俺做波巴人呐，被过卡不喜欢东西。
And so Garchen Rinpoche is really a gem. He's one of the oldest living lamas, Tibetan lamas. And his way of speaking is very kind of old style. So even for Tibetans, sometimes his dialect is difficult to understand. And so Khenpo has listened to many teachings of like Khenpo Tsering Lodro and Khensi Rinpoche many times, but in comparison, Garchen Rinpoche's teachings are harder, more difficult to understand. It's also a bit challenging for Khenpo with the book because every single verse that Garchen Rinpoche speaks is about bodhicitta.
아니 nga 당부 군이 사인다. 아따 때 라마다 장정생 장정성 거다 딱 공그 측대다 측지들이 정적 셈도 비용 믹서지 말와 맨자 갑도건 데라 메자 단데 좀 이게 지거나 가렌다 차거나 장적 셈당 데라 정말 로가 발냠도 돈이서 랍 지고이나 가레나 삼니 삼로만 거당 있어.
Because Khenpo was the person compiling the book. His understanding is this is a teaching about calling the Lama prayer, not a teaching on bodhicitta per se, yet every verse of Garchen Rinpoche is explaining bodhicitta. So Khenpo wasn't sure if he should separate the bodhicitta commentary into a section or how to order the book.
옛날에 타마텔랑 양당양더니 나랑 그때 이게 그 당니 딱 주소 약부 지원되고 딱 라마 콩랑 그 직접 리리가 나라 말은 주동 것을 대당 제르니 장치고 생고 냠내다 뜨니가 냠도 제르니 송한테 파지 드기용데 응니 그 거랑 제제제 답을 드기득시다 드기득시
But sort of Khenpo eventually, once he kind of got the whole pith of Garchen Rinpoche's view, he could see that even every element of the prayer and different, subject matters, all of them were tied together through this Bodhichitta theme, and it all came together. Khenpo, this just to point out to everyone that Garchen Rinpoche taught at Rigpa, Sydney in 2014, and in Newcastle in 2014. Garchen Rinpoche was teaching here.
아니 there is 제상 원리가 Garchen Rinpoche 코로나랑 그 장초 그셈 냠len 제거래라 추건소나양 장초 그셈랑 다 저니 송도 오다 다가랑 레샤 선야데 뺑알 셈고 당라 지갈시거라 믹스 그 다바지에서.
And then Khenpo started to really appreciate that every single thing that Garchen Rinpoche is saying, every aspect, every topic is from the perspective of Bodhicitta, and his faith really grew for Garchen Rinpoche. It's not published yet.
Okay. 做的你当不Garchen Rinpoche 지야 돼 비리니 공 야거 그 비리라 person 니스통 쭉글로래샤 가는 게 년토가 나한테 따인데 다가랑 지장도 니스통 쭉글로 비리라.
So the first time that Khenpo met Garchen Rinpoche was in Bir in North India in 2019.
Yeah. 2000 말에 니스통 쭉
I'm sorry, 2006.
Yeah, 2006. 아니 티캅스 땅아 종설샤달라 요래 아니 금다난 조래 다 금다난 조디 때니 띵은 진용 말에 다 콩아 팅 당보래 뭐 소인식 말에 그런 말다가 또 자와 끼마시래데 옛날에 금다난 조도 빼 무슨 닝지 친구고 this is 카메라나 락바근차 다동 콘데네 쿠마싱도 쿠마 마르보싱도 안 남긴 대파트 히티는 의흥도 종종지가 나나 가리는 뭐지 표현사를 뜬디 야미 고르모 뜬디 지금 입장압 자신도 다 하자 저런 약을 뜬디 칼리어인데 커선데 커서 나치불라 치치 체크하지 바르데 콩그 카메라나 추송 아니 뜬디 제송.
And so in 2006, when Khenpo first met Garchen Rinpoche had no idea who Khenpo was. Khenpo was just one of the ordinary monks there, but he had the chance to meet Garchen Rinpoche, and Garchen Rinpoche was just so magnanimous and gave him 30 minutes of his time and was very loving and really was so kind to Khenpo. And he took out of his pocket in his red robes like a red envelope with 450 Chinese yuan inside, and he gave it to Khenpo, and he said, I appreciate it's difficult, and he was very kind to Khenpo.
아니 티코르땡이 년토 나라 지장도 가 고모마 티가 비리티 종설해다 닝바요를 델파크니 마 다다 좀 종설해다나 참모요 가 람가나는 용데 니 셈라 가자니 나랑 찍불라지 지라고 땅 지니 땅식 말 다지 가서 말라리바 응고르다오다 텐데 지겨라 어ten저랑 땅이 되니 말 용니 되니 셈바데 빼면서 믹서 기쩌고 정하신 인데 년토나 지자.
That's Khenpo's diary from the time in 2006 when he was at Dzongtsar Shedra for a while, and this is back when it was in Deer Park today. And he was written in his journal there like how elated he felt when he left that meeting with Garchen Rinpoche. He was like singing sort of verses of praise and just felt so cheered and elated by the meeting.
근데 지니가 태원이 탐망보 지 다때 탐망보 현재 링고 창도리 태원이 망보 자디 남견 때나 태원이나 지든지 부부모 남견 모습이 가는 지 갈수거라 semban 나완 돈보 아니 다 디리 그 포스를 모스를 가서 남긴 거 라마 트라바 지 추데서라 잉시 가양 메조 망보시 오텐다야 가르치는 분자 돈나 바데 노원 주르도야 남탕 때서나 지금 상가 잡니 가정은 뭐지 공론 돈보 텐다레단 상가 잡니 남탕라야 지 가정은 뭐지 펩기르시야 디캅스냐 뭐 리리니 믹치 마탄칸 네바도 텐딩이 통마망보가 통소스.
And then Khenpo was able to meet Garchen Rinpoche several times again in Taiwan. He won't go into all the details, but basically there were so many people that turned up to see Garchen Rinpoche. Many very sophisticated, the most sophisticated, highly educated, the cream of society would turn up. All the Tibetan monks in Taiwan would turn up. Those that were educated, those that were just, not educated. And Garchen Rinpoche is already quite old. And several times Khenpo went with large groups of people to the airport to meet him. And every time, everyone would be crying just with inspiration when they met him.
대전은 같은 뭐지 나台湾라 되게 누군 가지고 라마지고 공인고 시바를 빼야 보여요. 공 나몰라고도 같은 뭐지가 까땅니. 삼모였나요? 뭐 나와서 용기연람는 계속 깨쳐고 매다 송 된다 송송라. 나모. 등산하고 매 나모.
Onda das comação katangris.
말 까나니로와 나 용사 용큰 요능이었나? 세모였나 양까니 저서 달라만 깔리 카그레 직세야지거라. 자원이 제초고 매다 송니 나 모든지 송도와 로망bunla.
And Khenpo has a good friend, a Drikung Kagyu friend in Taiwan, so who knows a lot about Garchen Rinpoche, and told Khenpo that Garchen Rinpoche, even many years ago, would always just admonish his students and say, you must call on me at any time, even if it's in the middle of the night. Don't hesitate. You must call on me at any time you need me.
아니 사치아데 베나다 영 가시 베나 게리크 쩌솔라 베 코랑선 로든 침보 정말 가스 톱나양 영그 게리크 로탕 되시기 요래 너쇼크 쩌솔라 시다 든지 지 남바데 나라 슈kin요 말 가시 너쇼크 쩌솔라 베 슈kin 약보용 그 보고 라마송 땅 가이 약보요나 영 야나라 슈kin 메교 든지 뭐 요레스.
And Garchen Rinpoche is really very conversant with whatever culture he steps into. So, for example, in Chinese society, with a lot of Buddhist, customs and a lot of pomp and kind of hierarchy within Buddhism, he can really relate to people within that. When he comes to the West, that doesn't have a Buddhist history, he can be, very engaging with people in a more, in a different type of way. So he's very adaptable.
뭐 망보지로와 대리가 변나 코로나 까이기 약보요 장 양면 인지 나라 약보요 양나 지 야릭 딘지 나라 코로나 로든 천리 약보 양면 보바가 나라 코로나 빈 로든 자침보 뭐 참마 갑도 이나 비 값이야 딘지 요래데 양 가시랑 그 값 딘지 믹스 하고 말했어 대리야.
So whether he's speaking with English speaking people, or Chinese, or even with Tibetans, he's able to be very relatable, and many people who have had an interaction with him, really love him and are quite impressed. Of course, there are some people that don't have any impression whatsoever.
옛날에 맨날 같이는 보지다면은 옛길이나 뉴뉴 정말도 그 말이다. 그 칭하이가 옛길 때서 공부하는 거 고정하나니 가지고 공부 요사리 나 푸동화 옛길 언니가 다다데 만다린 잡고나 또 진짜도 그거 요사리 밤에라고 니가 까물 나한테 뇨뇨 맞도 송구 말이 인지한테 나게 인지리 옛날에 정말 맛이 소소 가리나 지금 리용 참말은 제타봐 뭐 참말 생품라 쳤다봐 코로나 나서 동상에나 락차 찍은도 상근도 나이나 락차.
And so he doesn't actually speak all that much Chinese. He grew up in Qinghai province, so he can speak a little bit of the local Qinghai Chinese dialect, but he's not like fluent in general Mandarin, and probably not that fluent in English language either. But regardless, he's somebody that's able to really relate to people from every background and really be, have a real connection with people from every background. So Khenpo feels, he really gives him the prize for, he's really wonderful.
Yeah, 또 뒤에 다 락차데 가르리스나 자축 셈 그냥이라. 대야 파 살부시네. 가서는 뭐지 강사 수식라 파 특나야 지 공이 뭐시 바데레 고 마시 바레 고 데레 고 seniti iwa samlo na la iwa chi garwa te sama pha lu tang yak pa ta wo si 상마 당들랑니 소소고 지금 너무 약슈암 쪼보 약슈암 샘딱 니슈고 메데임비 삼로디 토니 레라스 제근도 다가랑 그 토니 뭐 상마가 샘라 판토바당 샘낭라 판 주조요레스.
And so what it is that Khenpo appreciates so much about Garchen Rinpoche and his practice of bodhicitta is that he's somebody that, despite whatever differences of people he meets and the different backgrounds and stuff, he doesn't discriminate. His mind is very open to connecting genuinely with the person in front of him, so that the person ends up feeling like like the closest friend or like somebody very beloved, because he doesn't have that bias in his mind. He's very open in engaging with people.
아니 대다위 지금 오판 그 대가 상로대 nature 그 맞추 바른 그 토니 랑진 그 용다 바시 창동.
And it's very uncontrived in his character. It's very natural.
Then there are much chances in Yamlin Gore and then there is on the song. The mixer chaining as a song low down the chick, the Sanyans and the Chagore, and the Richi Lab Goris at Tabduchi Japamamba, called Ranjing of Corangita, Matse the Garana Chata.
Also, for many of us, we might hear the description and teachings of bodhicitta, and tomorrow we might be able to repeat some of that in a class or try and practice it. But for Garchen Rinpoche, it's just very natural and spontaneous.
근데 인데 다 가서고 쭉 대가리에서나 장초고 심세난다 삼바장고세난다 대가서 문이 그 머리리 그 지금 소소고 소화가 나와요. 이게 지금 냠렌체니 가서 셈바데 잡혀라 땅야. 가서 그 지금 결혼하다 나랑 다 대세 위직 상스 여러와 산점지 망보시 여러와 대초대 파르직 또리야 그 대 장초고 심 냠렌 그 때와 되리스.
And so when we're practicing the kind heart of loving kindness and compassion, what it really means is to kind of release that strong boundary we keep between ourselves and others. Like you are you and I am me. It's really about letting that go.
다때 정말라 냠렌체 니가서 익톡니 상로 당면 냠렌이 요레스. 직대 건접 장첩 그 셈군이 상로 당야레 직대 돈담 장첩 그 셈군이 상로 당야레 생각수 다때 도도지니 시작에 예시 단더니.
So we're thinking again about bodhicitta in terms of the texts. There's the relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, which Khenpo will just discuss a bit more again.
아니 건접 장첩 그 셈군이 있다나 나랑라 대완도 반노신 고 대완도 비요. ngala dungur mantu pa nangin ko ndogu yo mare chikbari soso changbala samlo tanga mandu sanga tebo yo.
And so it's a practice of appreciating that just like I want happiness, so does the other person want happiness, and just like I don't want to suffer, so the other person doesn't want to suffer. So it's that space, that distance that we hold the other at. It's about letting go of that distance.
대상때 쪼지가 나나 디가 냠는데 다긴 냠비 삼로 다긴 예비 삼로 다고 잔치가 삼로스 근데 삼로 름바슴 그 토니데 중요하도 송고 요레
다긴 냠파 다긴 제바당 숨바디
다비 잔치 다글리장 잔치 바.
So then and back in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it talks of self and others. So there's equalizing the cherishing of self and others, and there's exchanging the cherishing of self and others, and then there's putting the value of the other as more important than how we value ourselves. There's 3 levels.
더니다 돈듬 장첩 그 생군이 상고당나 처마 상지리라 근데 인자 다다랑 마릭 비왕기 처마 추송을 말도 처마 랑진 그 니룩대 상지리 이 상지 연발라 심지 처마 수수고 상지 영모대 시야지지 용나년 봐 어떻게 양쪽 심레스 나그 양.
And then we can stop and recognize that everybody is a Buddha. And ultimate bodhicitta, it's recognizing that everybody is a Buddha, and it's just the conditioned ignorance of the mind, that conceptual obscurations that we don't see that, and it's that aspiration that all sentient beings can directly realize the basic true nature, which is Buddha. So that's a more tantric view of bodhicitta.
제정데 모범 림보체가 룹토고 나나야 니바텔라 드리보 ngakji senki kabargi chordo songdo wan dribu sangnig durji takbago luk senki te dagdang thai semjin nam yeni sangti yembala yember hipi dagnyet jangchom chugdo senki to songwa ote songdo
yeah, and then there's a beautiful verse from J. Mipam Rinpoche that talks from the tantric perspective, which is the fruition, looking at the fruition that oneself and all sentient beings are from the beginning Buddha by nature, and that true nature of all beings, which is equally Buddha, to that end, or to that fruition, I generate bodhicitta.
아니 따텐다오이나 다가당 셈진 탐치 예니 상지그랑신레 이 임발라 임버시빙오니 다가 셈진당 상지 니선 점분 점바데 바로 도르니 아니 주탐체 상지지랑신 임바 세바티나라 다 냠는지나 다 롱선 반다다 탐지 상첩신지랑신 이 장초그 셈세바데 버지 탁바가고 장초신 된다레스.
And then another verse which Mipam Rinpoche has cited from Rongzom Pandita, which was another tantric commentary on bodhicitta. He says, I and all infinite number of sentient beings who are vast as the sky have been Buddhas from the very beginning. And in knowing that this is the truth, we now cultivate the supreme bodhicitta.
Rongzom bisonganala Chu tamchi the rikpa jangchupji semse tata number so da rikpa chusok rikpa horwa ti rikpa te zoba chimbu rikpa derwa ti rikpa te la ya pa rongzombi chu tamchi rikpa jangchupji semse zoba seni ni rikpa te zoba chimbu tang ni te jangchup sem tandri jeni songdo us
and it comes to rikpa la sa yangju but a nangmi gi rig
Yomar.
So a line from Rongzompa was talking also all sentient beings have the Rigpa, just like the title of our center here, Rigpa, with the same meaning. This is the true nature of all sentient beings, which culminates in full enlightenment.
아니 이바데 당아서 남진 공진 닝득근 혼조 데레스 바다 견남비 로자바가 호스가 나라요 비다다 호 나쪽 나와 치르디 저리 호와 로고기던 참비로 랑리 고즈르 영성 알수실 참매제 인간이 심지도 데레스.
And another sort of tantric perspective on bodhicitta is a verse in the Longchen Mingtek Mundro, which you'll have on page 63. And it's mesmerized by the sheer variety of appearances or perceptions, which are like unreal images of the moon on the water. Beings wander endlessly astray in samsara's vicious cycle in order that they may find rest in the space of luminous awareness. I give rise to the four immeasurables of bodhicitta.
Then Nick of the career set on the horse, not so was, not so was, not so bad. Sure, dog, Zuri, Zuri, Chuna la Davi Zunin Shariomate, Dava Yomaris. Dava Zunin de Sharna, don't let Dava Yomaris. 옛날양 맨날양 연낭 샤르니더니 나서 셈 출다나 내 나긴지 코로아가 나올라 출도요 로그 주스는 문투니 출도요 다리 인지나니 리라고 인지라게 돼 하데 저대 가르치 거서도 랑서 랑니 그 릭바데 무시니 이 양라 날소 토바다 나서 날소 고스 생님 날소 양 대가로 랑지 고스리 양서 날소 와데 디나는 솔루진이 넣어야 돼. 디체도 대대지 중요하게 제도 참미지랑 담비 심기 고를 샘께 그 고등문이 된지식 송어레스.
So this is a beautiful verse that really sums up the true nature of bodhicitta. So back to that verse, mesmerized by the sheer variety of appearances. So just like a moon's reflection on the water, it's not a real moon there in the water, but it's appearing. And likewise, all of the projected appearances that the confused mind believes to be real. So sentient beings are wandering endlessly in samsara's vicious cycle. So this endless sort of cycle that's perpetuated by that confusion. So in order that all sentient beings may find the comfort and ease in the luminosity and all-pervading space of the true nature of their minds. So here comfort and ease is just like the meaning in Longchenpa's teaching. I generate immeasurable love, compassion, joy, and equanimity of the awakened mind.
Oh yeah. Tenda yende nga tso go chirtang ge simke tang. Kerang ki ngonro go zokchin zoba chimbo go ta ngonro ta ka jir ningma pa si yana. Ta karje sarcha yana chikbare geluk bala yan yore te so ka jir ningma go tinji nga tso go ta ngonro bonga chik sak ba yana. Ti ka ku chamro dang simke ka nang la yang sang ka nyamling ka samlu ji ni porter leb go yores.
So when we're talking of bodhicitta in general, or even in the Ngundro practices, like the Dzogchen Ngundros for the Nyingma school, it's also there in the Kagyu and the Sakya. It's also there in the Gelugpa. When we're doing the Vajrayana Ngundros and accumulating the 500,000 practices, in every one of those practices, there's always the view of the secret Mantrayana, or the Tantric view.
배차잖아 저런 그 강바 전부식 잡거나 사자 전부식 당번이 잡을던 데니 옛날 지금 모타 조사 요요 가든 요요 저저 장마 바비큐 저 장마가 사자도 요거를 봤어.
Like we have a really big property and a really big house. Everything can be within the grounds of that property. You might have a backyard and you have your buildings. You might have a barbecue, and everything is complete.
그때나 저런 그 족바 침묵 냠는데 마음만에 저런 게 서로 라글린 제고요나 뒤가 망서 그 점주당 심게 참아대 좀씩 만들어서 그 당나야야 망 시작하고요 그랬어. 그때 싸바래.
So likewise, if Dzogchen is the path, is the goal of the path that we're practicing, and we want to practice to that aim, then the very foundation, even in going for refuge and bodhicitta, it is pervaded by that foundation of the view. Khenpo
That's all. 아니 대행장 때나 짬조 값이야 뭐랑진 두지 쟁거라 장점 연구 바도 잡순주 다 저랑 그 정도 할때 이강라 요래 짬조 대가랑 요래 그러나 자롱 틀리랑지 장점스 뭐랑진 두지 쟁거서 자주고 롱롱그 틀리 추르고 어 근데 자득 롱송 그 감다 지안이 짬조 송고 요래 때 저땅이 짬조 나나 근데 연구 말이스 옛날 근데 송고 요와스 빼 대다오레스.
And in the Dzogchen preliminary practices, there's of course reference to the three roots and to the three kaya and to the whole mandala of the true nature. So every step of the way is that Dzogchen perspective.
대제바이나 다다 저랑 그 향수 심지 값이었는데 따위 저땅 그 심지 잠만 야침보 심지요나 마음바나 적성이 냠는데 정식 남 다 나도 당선까지 야다나 적친 냠는 거 로소고 망치리스 로소 에듀케이션 바나 적바진 로소 잡야게 따따게 지지 가르쳐 거라 베이직 망지 때 다른 점로가 나나요 적바진 로소데 다 연구요레스.
Yeah. So for even for really practicing bodhicitta, just even in a general way, we'll have an excellent education within Dzogchen. We can consider that like a really good basic education for Dzogchen if we have a really good practice of bodhicitta.
샤버드가 저거 딴 데리가 건상람이 샤롱데서 탐몽치 홍도 탐문난기 홍도 냠는 무지 차락돼서 럼바 때서 빼면서라마 공마가 콘소고 냠는 것 아니 바 락렌 제작교 된지 그 람름님장 근데 정말 빼 용선 침보 요레스
So we read a book like The Words of My Perfect Teacher, there's so many categories. Like there's the general preliminary practices and the extraordinary ngondro, there's the outer ngondro and the inner ngondro. There's so many kind of stages, and these great lamas of the past, based on so much practice and explanation, you know, every one of these categories and explanations is so meaningful.
근데 타마테 다 장축심 길라지나 벨라지 냐지 라판다고 돈바 내가 소설 다루이 돈바스가 상식 담축하는 장축심 빌 탑샤데 가리리 산나가 주때 까마치기 나가 되지히다 까마치기
And it's important to understand that if we have that vow, that bodhisattva vow, just like we might have tantric vows or other vows, it's important that we understand what that entails. So Khenpo will just address that shortly.
So
there's the things that we should do and things we should avoid. And so what we should avoid is harming others. So it's a commitment to do our utmost best to not create any harm towards others.
아니 고야데 강스나 삼바동 조라니기 강탑도 고잔라 판토야가 삼로동 판토야가 리가제야 되스.
And what we should do is that utmost best to help others.
나몽아 로다 달로 니스통 죽인디 로 같이 로 죽섬 공을라 가시는 버친 집 가서 가시는 버친 알아 자시 락len 섭던 나지 나송스.
And so back in 2006, when Khenpo first met Garchen Rinpoche, he gave him a text on the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. If you've met Garchen Rinpoche, he likely gave that to you as well.
Yeah, red course one. It's Jen. Gary. Yeah, okay. And 콩그 가르송송스나 콩틱 앞서 콩 야나글라 팅원의 페비오사리 야나글라요 비가스 베이징 그 콩그 공전당기 미된달라 데인스 그래서 줄루키 말하는 공전당거랑 killing 말와 지그리스 얘나 니나나 해야데 뭐야라 약보체고스야 두보체면이스야 잠르라 콩그 자이송도 공전당을 다다와 등가는 누구 와서 그래요 콩페 탑랑기 바리 So
Garchen Rinpoche is really skillful and very, wise man. So he'd actually been to China quite a long time ago. Obviously, he was raised there. And so he had the book, The 37 Practices of the Bodhisattva, which back in the day, because religion wasn't allowed in the communist, the Mao Zedong era, a book like that technically wasn't allowed. But Garchen Rinpoche really promoted it because it was all about helping others and being altruistic and helping society. So he managed to get the Communist Party to accept this book.
그래서 장초석은 냠는데 만karbo 찍톱 세와지거래. 만karbo 찍톱 나제래 송요래. 근데 만karbo 찍톱 세나 만karbo 찍톱 세와지고 성지고 송고 나려요래. 이 만karbo 찍톱 세와때 나 가래나 판토야 만찍 민사래. 내 나긴지 장초그 셈때 뭐 가래나 판토야. 뭐 드디 다 가르스거로 뇨몽바다 딱 처음하게 되게 님부 연남면한테 만karbo 찍탑다오데 장소그 셈레스.
Garchen Rinpoche refers to bodhicitta as the all-powerful white medicine, which is a term from the Buddhist sutras. That it's a medicine that's it cures everything. It's all-purpose. So whatever klesha, negative emotions, whatever problems or ailments we have, it will work. Bodhicitta.
근데 뭐 향주선 그 냠는세 왔대요. 당포님이 정말 루당 거야고 돈다 지금 말해스. 베나 나리 반친 그 송가나라 메뉴 대선 때 중님이 연습 직직으로. 그 가르라 거서 저런 니름 대다지라 레메나 베나 저런 따다 샹초선 바 사토바 찍면나 엉인고디 때랑 짠니머견라 짜야게 믹디 짜야게 람나 티 샹초선 바 하바탄 가리오레스 강르스나 저런게 티 대가 그 레월다고데 레비오 말와 차지되라 어 된다 연장 때야 림바 따든 잡요리 제자 존주가 나라 림바진들 합버스자 송 직대가로 요르와 맞아 학고로.
And so these bodhicittas are not exhorting us to suddenly give everything away and just sacrifice ourselves entirely. In Bodhisattva Charyavatara, there's the verse that says, you know, if we're not on the bhumis, if we're not at the level of enlightenment, and to just cut off our head or our limb and give it away is actually contradicting the practice of the bodhisattva, that we have to be really honest with ourselves and at peace with our level as a practitioner of bodhicitta.
근데 상지 좀 든디가 금든니 jarbu sargyal serwa tega tia 샹초 sembi domba shuwa akni 샹초 sembi domba shu sangndo yana yang soto ko mari nga jarbori tanda menda chego yore chama soto ko mari gare chego re se sanji la shubi ka so sanji ga jarbo chembo royang ram drengyang ram dugyang ram chancho gusim momba chancho gusim de mabjina tani chana tegen jiki yore sondwa 그 가르스나 저런 야 랑니로요난데 말대요난데 참점제요난데 칼라사요난데 장축부심 라도 신진탐체 제도 상지고만 토버샤오 양 비상로데 양당양양 즉 소속을 잼베지나 아니 저런 니급 대가란 리기요 송요리스 드리 제니 로고스.
Hear the bodhisattva teachings and precepts and take the vow, but feel that in our lifestyle, whatever your jobs are, that you can't hold all of the precepts. But we don't need to worry because the Buddha famously told a great king, and the king had many things that didn't allow him to be a perfect bodhisattva. But the Buddha's advice was having that aspiring bodhicitta, really aspiring to attain full awakening for the sake of all sentient beings. As long as you have that in your heart, whether you're standing or walking or sitting or holidaying or whatever you're doing, that moment is good. It's good practice.
옛날에 니마치라 저런 그 향초 그 심디 자체를 손디가 리보고 짐바야 땅 타고 요래. 그러나 빠져는 뭐 지금 간저 코나 약간 된다. 연디가 나자 참아 말을 뿐디 자축하고 이거 다다 사체대가는 요래 자축한다. 장마를 추지하지 요래. 디 장마를 추지하고 저래. 장마를 추그 강라 도심부지요. 안디 도데 빠져는 뭐지 약간 지금이 들어 참아 말 뿐이더니 뭐때 저때 도장대走了 如果사진이 64 사실은 와. 된대야 요리스 야 향주심 비하 빠르는 거지 나 제가 좀 마음만 들리지 않아요.
But at the same time, we should, you know, motivate ourselves to progress so that we can give more and more parts of ourselves. Like Patrul Rinpoche up in Zachuka, where Khenpo is from, there's a very famous spot where Patrul Rinpoche had taken off his clothes and just sacrificed his body to the mosquitoes. So in the future, we should aspire to be able to do that. Pile of carved mantra stones called Jama Ritro in Zachuka that marks the spot.
Oh yeah, ani terang ngaso 장수고 생고고 가세데 다가나 자이엔스 아니 다 트와티는 치즈 karma 가세 라요나 아니 장서도 잘송 생각라 잡으면라.
We'll end the teaching part here. And if you have any questions, we have a few minutes. So you can put up your hand with the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll take questions for Khenpo.
Actually, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Khenpo, you can hear me?
Hi. How are you?
I thank you for the stories of Gachin Rinpoche. It reminded me of a question I have, because meeting Gachin Rinpoche and also Yangtang Rinpoche, in my to be in their presence, the bodhicitta is so overwhelming. You know, like it's such an experience, the greatest experience I've had, a bodhicitta, is to be in the presence of these masters. But both of them, they suffered so much. They had great suffering. Both were in prison for more than 20 years and suffered torture, and people they loved and cared for were killed in front of them. And I've always wondered, does this great suffering, is this what makes a great bodhisattva? Is the strength of their bodhicitta, the atmosphere around them, does this come from the suffering that they have had to experience to be like this for others? That's my question.
네, 가르치는 부채, 양탕 림부채, 콩남바니기, 콩남바 쿤둔기 돈라 지아비 캅스, that 소낭치 요래 콩수 장칩샘, 콩남바기 장칩샘기 소낭 랑소스기 샘라 스지 능그두스, but 피슈침보 요레스. 이네 양 콩다부차시나 콩수페 쿠체게나로라 둥아페 타포 mampo nyong송 켐보기 켐바나진. Then inji menji jangchup sem the ngoni sem che goyana ti dawogi jangchup sem nu pachembo then the goyana konso dung chembo la teni jangchup sem che ni pa du dungal chembo goreves.
that te ngi samlo ta na yinchik menchik kons namba zongkan na la lo nyushu samji derwa te na yenche ni dungar goya samar. Yana yangi dumar de mikdi lo jongje bikas lo dog namjig na 가르치는 코리 님이 약한데 대 코리 님이 lo dog namjig na 그 dumar 대서 소소고 냥 맞잖아요 소소고 냥와 나진 찍대 그 세제 yangi dumar라 삼로 땅이 아니 대sem가 땅이 니시기 봐요나 되네 향수기 심지야 비판도요레스 다때 판도가 받던데 맞아 그 메도 모르는 거 있어요. 옛날에 소소 인증문제 공소나 인증 맞지는 용 말에서 되는 게 있어.
So Khenpo feels that to spend 20 or 30 years in prison is not necessary. That there's a good reason why in the Ngondro practices and the turning the mind to Dharma that there's reflecting on the faults of samsara. That Khenpo does feel that it is essential to witness suffering, that there's always so much suffering in the world, and we need to look at the suffering of others and to be really attentive and witnessing all of the suffering of others. In Lojong, in mind training, there's so much, really reflecting on suffering of others. So he does feel that that's essential requirement for bodhicitta, is to really reflect on the suffering of others.
놀주시 여러와 나바 참 시질 좀 돈발라 도마 먹고 요래 아니 좀 돈비 로마티도 가래 나근도 라디 니마치랑 길 잡아시 용거 드디어 다 지금 대장제 근도 지금 추송 것도 참아 빼야 버리스 디나니 게시 캄발롱바 캄롱바스베디 캄롱바 가르치근도 캄발롱하나 지금 추메사게 딘디 때가 좀 리강라고 딘다 손이 zangu 어떤니 심니 미쳐다 무니는도 라티 추디레 송 에콘그 시아모 퍼는데 리지 공로 말이다 옛날에 리지 탈모자리 송 빠져좀 버지 디콜란 제시 잡디 가르리지 공 심진 그 등으로라 상로 땅니 니지 상주고 심 운니데 고니 심 길라게요 제장티 추추 근데 인도서서 그 캄발롱바 종콘라 요 말이데 리지 사자 동바 손이 곰 요장 아니 믹스 연구 요래라 은 대당냠도 장초구 생구 냠는 그 망역이 와장 야 냠는 그 망역 맨나 다가서 심진 그 등으로 통다는 아니 뇨로 그래요 여랑시 자가 책으로 그래 대사야 야보지 토트 거래서 어때
이 로주디 캅스바바 자 파트론부치 캅스바바레
아니 롬동바 롬도 파트론부치 그때 송요래 건설람이나라 옛날에 인진 롬동바 당로마가 놀지와.
And in Patrul Rinpoche's teaching, it talks of the story at the time of Drom Tompa. who was a Kadampa Geshe. So Dromtonpa had many disciples, and once he asked, okay, what are all the monks doing? And it was reported to him that, oh, some monks are learning this and some monks are giving Dharma teachings. But there's one monk, good monk, and he goes off to places where there's no Dharma activity happening. He goes up onto the hillside and he puts a Zen over his head and he just cries and cries in sorrow. And when Patrul Rinpoche explains the story, he says,
oh, yeah, okay.
When Patrul Rinpoche is explaining the story, he's explaining this monk with the Zen over his head. You know, there was nothing wrong with him, but he was reflecting on the sorrows and the suffering of other sentient beings. And Khenpo is telling us here, we don't need to drive ourselves crazy, just looking, you know, constantly just feeding ourselves on the suffering of others, but to, you know, to be witnessing it is important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Khenpo. Does anyone else have a question? Walter, go ahead.
Khenpo, sometimes I've heard that Bodhichitta, they use the word warrior with Bodhichitta. Why is that so? Why would they use that word?
Jangchup Sempa, you know, let's see, the power, warrior, power, ben a mak jakenda, the power gets the Karichani Pichutanguris.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Where are you from?
I'm from Newcastle.
Oh, okay.
I was at Gachin Rinpoche.
Very good. Okay. That detail is Pao se the injigang kandi juriyunga haku maresirwa. Yana Satwa the vocal la jurwa tang Jamaica la juria tang. Tejin the chitang ki larger kana la kare la vioresina. Ning top chimbo. Lo top chimbo. Gangla yang lo mjumba. O tenre la vior ma poco. Magmeda magbon la vior maris. Ni kodon koran maris.
That's so. This is a good point. Khenpo is saying he's not sure how the word is translated into English. So with warrior, so warrior is a translation of the word sattva, or Jangchu Sempa for bodhisattva. And so sattva is the Sanskrit, and it's translated into the Tibetan as pao, and in other languages. But the real meaning of that word is heart courage, is heart, the strength of heart, is the strength of mind. It's great strength of mind and heart that doesn't give up. That's the real meaning of the word pao or sattva here, or warrior.
Sempa is the same. Also, Dorje Sempa, another shadow, yeah. Very, last one. Next one.
Thank you. Who's next? Anyone? I don't see any hands, so if you do have a question, just unmute and ask.
Oh, hello, I can't find the hand. Can I question? It's Rose. When you said, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When you said you don't get eaten, you don't get eaten by the suffering, but you witness the suffering. How do you get to the stage where you can witness the suffering? Because sometimes the suffering seems so. What do you mean by witnessing the suffering? That's my question.
Ani kadi na donante rang la nyumpa soya la den de chego maresi na yang ta shengi dunga di samotango re sung yondu ta khap la ta zamboling la dunga there's a sem la mang tha do khap la nang so there's a shum doya la machim rang che re cha gadus ni tang so there's a that dunga di part kajur magobala kanduchini samotango re
Yakpuch kumasu. Zambalang ke dungurla samlo tana kare.
that cover and also junction same key going on so dungal bana korwi dungal any shing that they la donante goiri the samutan goiri yene yang dungal mampo samutana and also that some la dungal de das mantra go also similar mashumba la kandichini
yeah similar okay yeah tade muni nga tente something do pena draw me mathiga nang ko samlo tangwa ina ji gangar mangshu changeng gri de jarang so sa da de ji pena konsan choge na re tatini ma yona tina pena garchen bo se re pena zongser kin kanchin gung go wang chi yo lo ja ji ja tu kana ni ka sha re kong zong kana ni lo ni shi zaksum ya mer je ju lo ni shi lak je ju ane gonglo tukshi riksum ko ka komba jamni dawa mangbu no la himalai kang garni ni jagar yoni ni jeni kongro ina kongso soso gi dungor nyore yanji dungor la semkur che ko yorete kongso yan sambo sigla me thoma ge min thong odi semga chona ti dungor sama mamtaya ni ko meba chakdo ya mi si chakdo wa tati yamsung mushore.
Khenpo finds it's very interesting to reflect on some of the people who have suffered the most, people like the Dalai Lama or Garchen Rinpoche, with all these years in prison, or there was a great Lama from Dzongsar Monastery who spent more than 20 years in prison. And then at age 63, he walked over the Himalayas to India. So these people have suffered themselves such gross suffering. Yet when most people meet them, they end up feeling quite joyful. And it's almost like in those moments, you forget suffering altogether. So there's definitely something special going on there.
제가 가르라고 요새나 yanji dungur tes 소소 간츠 시기엔 그 dungur 살이야 등인 간츠 시기엔 나라 띵 간츠스나 웅긴 요래 삼니 삼로 땅야를 말도 띵니 dungur 갈수 거라 다데 띵니 그 직다가 논식직레 삼니 삼로 땅게요 삼말이스
웅긴데 that's
논식 그 소라 또 논식 나가 현직진이 소소라 이야 나가 현직이 등어대 코로 대체기요 말이스 오늘 가르쳐 동다 나가 니파 강요요 그 등어대서 살이야 나라 게 웅긴시 요래 삼니 아니 된대지기 삼로 땅다 찍게 되래샤스 삼로 땅다 땅보디 되래샤
Khenpo is saying there are two ways of looking at suffering. One is where we witness suffering, we observe all the suffering, and it's almost like a weight. It feels overwhelming. It's like a weight on us. The second way of facing suffering is to face it with a sense that we are taking on responsibility for that suffering.
니바데 자치 유직데 가르쳐 동다는 장초부 셈나냠데 시럽 요거리스 따뜻히 같이 버리지 저런데 시럽 당들어요 시럽.
But this all comes down to wisdom, because that feeling responsible for the suffering and bodhicitta have that element of wisdom that link them. That wisdom is crucial.
이 롱신 근친 롱신 람정가 다가랑 소요래. 다가 좀 혼조가 나나 나쪽 나와 출디 저리 그런 거기든 참비도 세와데 다가랑이 다 심진 참마 등물은 두데 돈라 물음 나지 예리 상야기 냠len데 소소그지 아니 물음 나기는 소소 깡거면 좋았다 얘나 뭐 참마 물음 임버 고메타 닝지 다 콘소고 마고 봤는데 물음 나지 임버 돈이 이 약보식다가데 추 나던데 돈이 상진로야가 식기 체동이 맞은 제기엔 얘나 우리 설랑데 물음 나서래도 삼디 소소 강라데 노식디요 말스.
So this comes down to the verse in the Longchen Ningtik preliminary practices generating bodhicitta, and it says, mesmerized by the sheer variety of appearances, which are like unreal images of the moon in water. And so the wisdom here is the one that recognizes that there's so much suffering, but actually it's all just like a dream. people are suffering, but it's because of these dreamlike appearances that people are getting confused by. And so with that right perspective, we can witness all of the suffering and see it clearly and face it, but also have the perspective to feel that sense of engaged responsibility that one will become enlightened to free everyone from the delusion that causes the suffering. And so even if we don't actually have that insight yet, if we don't have that wisdom ripened yet, still, it's really important to keep that aspiration, that inspiration. So it's a wonderful book to read is by Kunu Lama. It's In Praise of Bodhichitta by Kunnu Kunu Lama. And then like Shanti Deva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's really important to regularly recite these verses because they really inspire our mind. And we want to continually, feel that inspiration with the compassion for others.
This
Holiness the Dalai Lama often says when his mind feels heavy and sad, he'll read Shanti Deva.
Next.
Thank you.
Can I just ask about something? Oops. Oh, yeah. What about Tonglen? I'm getting the echo because of, I'm thinking about Tonglen, the practice of Tonglen as you're talking. Do you practice Tonglen, and do you have that as a practical way of overcoming self? Overcoming the grasping of self-cherishing and as a tool to do that. Do you practice Tonglen yourself?
So Khenpo Tsering Tonglen because da sosorang gi nyamlen di Tonglen gi nyamlen di china da dakjin pangyala kandu chini pentogris Tonglen gi nyamlen di.
Tonglen gi nyamlen sira te ta pe chaja ba na singa sorwa. Chara chalak ji yores terang de chalak de chirang ge chalak de chitang ge chalak ji re samna chirang tendi chalak ji yo me ya tengi maris. Lak sona ya samlo kan ya maris. Dungur yo maris to. Nda pe cha chi bo yin de ta ji de bo ba ge ya dang zin ra wo dang ba ji ge rumbu chi xiu ji yin samna ani lak sona pe ti ge dungur yores. Pe nan de chirang ga hu ge pe ne chirang ge ta ji so so ge ji pe na ta chi ga hu ge chirang ge garse korata garam da wo si ge cha ba yin samna pe tani tan zamba yores. Laksona dungur yores. Yana nima chikla charang ki motela marga bachana ti chalak te rigona pondud me bachakres. Ti jimsen kangarsena sosola nzamba kare ji shubba yana te najing dungur te dan te la te ni tani kangar ma boshi yores. Antin nzamba te chongor songayna nzamba te dan reyut ko kangar te so chongor rogo ba de ko jaja ngui ni sres. The chuluk kasaji mare ta ngui ni sres.
And something that's really makes it very clear to see is that if we have something that we really cherish and we lose it, the suffering is in proportion to how much we cherish. So if it's just like any old object that we don't care about and we lose it, we're not going to suffer. But if it's something really expensive or precious, like onyx or gold or something, and you lost it, we're going to feel a lot more suffering. Or if it's somebody like the most dear person to you that you lost, then naturally there'd be a lot of suffering. If it's somebody that you've forgotten about and you might not feel. So it's very much in proportion to how much we grasp at something.
Yenayang Yena yang rawa, he indi tada tonglen sewa de karir se tonda sem ko tanglan de samni soso me yamba go dumur te ngi rang thola yong or sho. Ngi dewa de yalla tang yen samba yena rangjin ku me yalla sem kur che ya tang me yalla nyer je de nyamlen de kontor soni soso nga chikbo yin nga la choma yong me shok se ya de samlo de shuk chong tang yo go yores. Di jimsen ke de 배 가르쳐 걸어 되게 그 당전대 총으로 들어왔던 상식의 심체를 들어라 판토고요. 갑자기 판토고요.
And so Tonglen is directly really affected with the self-grasping and all the suffering that goes with that, because we're taking that value of the self, that cherishing of the self, and just flipping it through the Tonglen practice, so that we're taking responsibility for suffering of others, with a really strong aspiration, and then we're giving our joy to others, and that flipping it really directly helps. With that self-cherishing, with the suffering of that.
배차자바이나 머카시가 녀철다다 자낙 로쇼라 추 강거치 못하도와. 근데 근데 멋지니를 하자 배 야보지도 다 남진 들이 저라 요 말때 배나 민코르 그냥 참아 추 강오디가 아니 콘소셜로가 로디가 긴고데서다 보고데서 갑도 응원을 들어가요. 소소 보데서다 포스르데서 기압라 단도 대산죠 나네가 때라 참아 배 야보 제당 야보를 쓰는 거 주토비오레스. 디갑제나 다때 동그 소소 루당니 뭐 잠바가 리가 제기요레. 미 근축군이 하장 프로덕션 하시래. 때 동린스나 디리지 그 상로데 다다 면나요. 때 종들 제기요레스. 디나 돈지 때 디리직데라 생그 땅에 주마만 비 동린 지요나 소소 등을 때 체를 줘요 말이. 총을 줘요.
And we can see, like in places like southern China right now, where there was a lot of flooding, and some members of society in that circumstance, they just took it upon themselves to really go out and help to rescue others. So they were doing whatever they could, finding whatever vehicles they could, and carrying older people on their backs. And these people were really putting themselves, in the firing line of a lot of suffering. But the experience, because of how they were helping others, the experience becomes quite joyful and celebrated. So we can see just how that flips the experience of something around. So it's really, some people sort of practice that in a regular way in our daily lives. And then we can really see how it helps.
나서고 동린데 초다마호니 다다양 센팅이 나라요. 코르바 나라요. 성지가 동린라 초다제니 아니 라글렌제니 상지송으로 심진당 성지기 캬버때 다가랑을 라. 존주가 대성 타자요.
And in
그래서 나가고 동린진의 종친부지 라크레 상야고 디금 전바데요래. 현나지요래. 어때요?
So Shantideva has another verse that says just this, that that the difference between ordinary sentient beings and a Buddha is that the Buddha genuinely practiced Tonglen, exchange the cherishing of self for others, and look at the difference. But we just tend to feel that Tonglen is going to bring suffering onto us. We fear that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Khenpo. If that's no more questions, then we might dedicate here.
Okay.
Tom? Through this merit, may all beings attain the omniscient state of enlightenment and conquer the enemy of faults and delusion. May they all be liberated from this ocean of samsara and from its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, all these merits now I dedicate to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate all these sources of merit of mine for all beings to perfect good actions. Now we'll just do the long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In the heavenly realm of Tibet, surrounded by a chain of snow mountains, the source of all happiness and help for beings is Tenzin Gyatso, Chenrezig in person. May his life be secure for hundreds of kalpas. And now you skip this one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. With your compassion, inspire us with your blessing. With your love, guide us and others along the path. With your realization, grant us siddhis. With your power, dispel the obstacles facing us all. Outer obstacles, dispel them externally. Inner obstacles, dispel them internally. Secret obstacles, dispel them into space. In devotion, I pay homage and take refuge in you. Oma Hum Benzo Guru Pema Siddhi Hum. Guru Rinpoche, the Buddha of past, present, and future. Dewa Chenpo, Guru of great bliss, the source of all cities. Duru Dropotsal, wrathful one that subdues negativity, who removes all obstacles. Grant your blessings, we pray. Through them, may all obstacles, outer, inner, and secret, be quelled, and may all our aspirations be fulfilled. Oma Hum Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hum. Finally, prayer for the tradition of Guru Padmasambhava. May the living tradition of Guru Padmasambhava, Bodhisattva Santarikshita, and the Dharma King Trisong Detsen spread throughout the world in all directions. May the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha be present in the minds of all, inseparably at all times, bringing peace, happiness, and well-being.
Khenpo, thank you so much on behalf of all of us for teaching us today on Zoom, even with all the small awkwardnesses. I think all of us at whatever stage we are on the path have received something to really take away with us and reflect on. Maybe it's about the practice of bodhicitta to release the strong boundaries we have a habit of keeping between ourselves and others, or maybe it's a deeper understanding of suffering and the attitude of bodhicitta that we bring to that. There were so many things you shared with us. We really appreciate it. We wish you every success in your work and pray that you may live long and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma for the benefit of all beings. And I'd also like to thank Chosom so much for your very clear translation. It's such a pleasure to listen to you do translation. So just as always, at the end of a teaching, we have an opportunity to make offerings to the Lama. Just to remind you that the fee Rigpa charges for these sessions is just for the infrastructure that makes it possible to offer them. And it is traditional for students to make a separate personal offering to the Lama and for the translation in order to make a personal connection. So Anne is going to post in the chat some details of how you can do that. And we will also send details in the follow-up email next week. So thank you all. Keep safe. For those of us in lockdown, keep wearing masks and doing social distancing, everything we need to do, and keep warm. And we'll see you in a month's time. Our next session is Saturday, the 21st of August on Vajrasattva with Anisankhe Chosom from Lerabling. And just make sure you note that the time for that is different so that she doesn't have to get up quite so early in the morning. So that will be from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. on the 21st of August. So we are going to have a short break now for, let's say, 15 minutes. So that's until 22:04. And then Rose 2 will guide us in Longchen Nintik Nongdra in English. So thank you all. Namo